Previous to one of the greatest austerities for me in the early days was when summer came, it was impossible to get a cold drink. The only thing to drink was the water from the well. That was it. There was no juice, there was no soda, there was no ice, no cold, no refrigeration at all. The only refrigeration was a tunnel that the devotees had dug into the hillside right up here. And the idea was that the devotees were going to dig this tunnel, and it was going to go all the way from here into the forest in the back. It was going to be a shortcut. Well, they only got about 20 feet into the hill. And this cave would fill with water. It would just seep in. So in the back of the tunnel, about 20 feet in, we dug a hole about 2 or 3 feet deep. And we would bring the milk cans up there and stash the milk in that hole of cool water from in the cave, and that was our refrigeration. It was the only refrigeration in the community, previous to the freezer for the hepatitis. So, another wonderful thing was when devotees, because we were starving, on Sunday, Taru would make the sweet rice, and there was, at the time I moved here, I think there were 40 devotees that were living here, and Taru was making, for the Sunday feast, 40 gallons of sweet rice. I remember clearly Kirtananda Maharaj cutting it to 20 gallons, and I remember clearly Taru crying. I felt pretty bad about it myself. So with the idea that every devotee had a gallon of sweet rice on Sunday, the good news was that they couldn't eat it all, and they would have to stash it somewhere to be able to keep it for the next day. So that meant Sunday nights, you would go scouting around to different streams or where you thought somebody might hide their sweet rice to keep it cool for the next day. Now this one Sunday night, Madhava Ghosh and I happened to be being the night guards because we were being attacked and shot at so frequently from this road, and after, of course, the bikers had attacked, we had a night guard system. So 2 devotees would stay up all night long and keep guard. And Kirtananda Maharaj bought some big shotguns for us to keep, to do night guard with. So while you were sitting out on the front porch out here doing night guard, your main meditation was, I hope no one attacks. And your secondary meditation, which was right up there with that meditation, and sometimes overcame it, was, I wonder if we can find any prasadam anywhere. So the night guards would spend their time making sure that nobody was killed in the community and looking for prasadam so that they wouldn't die of starvation. And so this one particular night, Madhava Ghosh and I were sitting on the porch with our shotguns, and we said, well, you know, maybe there's some sweet rice in the tunnel. Let's go up and check the tunnel and see if we can find some sweet rice. So we left our shotguns on the porch. We went in the tunnel, and you had to walk along planks through water all the way to the back in the dark, and then you would reach down into this big hole in the tunnel and reach around, you know, to try and find a jar with sweet rice. So while we're in there looking for the sweet rice, all of a sudden Madhava turns to me and says, did you hear something? And I go, I don't know. And we're listening, we're in the tunnel, and all of a sudden we hear something. So, oh no, we're the night guards, and there's somebody out there. We're guarding the refrigerator. You know, everyone heard what happened to the freezer. Someone might steal the tunnel, who knows? So Madhava Ghosh and I come running out of the tunnel, and sure enough, there's a car parked right underneath Kirtananda Maharaj's cabin. There's about 4 or 6 drunk guys walking around. And by now, they're holding our shotguns. So Madhava Ghosh and I have to come running down and convince them to give us our shotguns back. That was a story of New Vrindavan refrigeration. Thank
you. Before the 11 Chowpatties, there was one preparation for lunch, which was very, very austere. Sudani was the head cook. He's a fantastic cook, but you can only do something with what you have. And I was his assistant cook at that time. So one day, he told me to go down to the grain room to bring the grains up for preparing lunch. So I went down, And I came back up and said, there's no bags of grains. He said, no, there is bag of grain. It's down there. I saw it this morning. You go get it. I went down. I looked all around. Came up. Said, there's no bags of grain. He said, there is. I saw it this morning. I said, no, there isn't. I looked thoroughly. He said, was there anything down there? He said there was 4 bags of horse feed. He said, that's it. That's what we're feeding the devotees every day. So I brought up this 100-pound bag of horse feed. There was pictures of horses on it. With big green letters saying horse feed. And we ground it up. And remember that red grinder? It was by hand. It was really hard because the grains were so hard. And he would boil them in water and add some cumin seeds, and that was called upma. It was so distasteful that everyone was looking and praying for some alternatives. So the devotees who worked in the barn, we used to go up to the grain room, and we used to actually eat the cow's grain because it tastes better. And do you remember the silage? Silage is, you grind up corn and stalks. It's not the part you eat of corn, it's the stalks. And you just store it for the winter in the silo. It used to be frozen like blocks of ice. So we'd heat it up in the bathhouse. And then we'd bring it in a big muddy wheelbarrow into the barn to feed the cows. And this was the winter. And I remember one time that wheelbarrow was smoking with this rotten silage. And all the cowherd boys were gathered around it because it smelled so good. And we all started eating it. Kalaji Prabhuji, would you like to tell about Ras Purnima, 1973?
Probably you should tell. Well, I'll do the introduction. I'll give the introduction, you can give the story. For the night of the Rasa dance, for special nights, appearance nights of certain personalities, and of course the Rasa dance, devotees would cook dozens and dozens and dozens of preparations, and we would make sweet rice and put it out in the forest. So the cowherd boys, that's what we called ourselves then. Sudhanu, Parambrahma, Taru, Radhanath Swami and I. Samba. Ambarish was one of the we would often take prasadam together. Sometimes cow feed, but generally we would take prasadam together. And we kind of banded together, like we saw ourselves as the cowherd boys. It was hard work, and Radhanath Swami and I, by the way, we used to team up. We had cows that gave so much milk at that time, 80, 100 pounds of milk at a time, which is 12, 14 gallons, which if you see a big 5-gallon bucket fills up 2 buckets. So we would team up. Radhanatha Swami and I we teamed together. He'd get on one side of the cow and I'd get on the other. The faster you milk the cow, the better it was for the cow and the more milk you would get. So Radhanatha Swami and I always had the biggest cow. Because we spent a lot of time together wrestling in the pujar room, so we were very strong.
Tell us about the wrestling, please.
Wrestling is later, just remind me. Okay. So, anyway, as cowherd boys would be, we were a bit cantankerous. And I was the temple president at the time. Radhanath Swami was a surrendered soul. So, as a surrendered soul, he had to follow the instruction of his temple president.
Ras Purnima was the night everyone waited for. Literally, devotees were working for weeks to make preparations for that one night. Over time, devotees would stay up all night making preparations because there was no time for them during the day. On Ras Purnima, there were hundreds of preparations. We'd have a big kirtan at night for Radha Vrindavan Chandra. On this altar, we would put all the preparations the pujaris would. Mother Kratila, who was Kulaji Prabhu's wife, was the head pujari at that time. And the idea was that all the preparations would be kept on the altar all night, because Radha and Radha Chandra are supposed to be having their Ras Leela. This is for their pleasure throughout their Leelas. And the next morning, during breakfast prasad, all the prasad would be distributed. Another thing they did is they cooked a huge barrel of sweet rice and put it in the forest in case the deities in their transcendental forms go into the forest to dance. They have sweet rice there. And that was top secret. Only the most trusted, honorable devotees would be allowed to put that sweet rice in the forest.
Instructed by the temple president.
Yes. So Kulaji Prabhu, being the temple president, but also being a cowherd boy in the barn, had two roles. One is the enforcer of justice, and the other as a thief.
Only with Mahaprasad.
Only with Mahaprasad. So there was Taru and Param Brahma. Taru happens to be the famous prasadam addict. He had a series of articles in the Vrindavan Spirit entitled Confessions of a Prasadam Addict. They were very famous throughout our society. So Taru and Param Brahma were told by Kulaji exactly where the sweet rice was. Now it's really a science, because you can't take it until after it's offered. And the offering is complete after Mangalarti. And the people who are supposed to get it, under Kalaji's instruction, were going to get it after Mangalarti. So what they did is they left during the Nrsimha prayers, and they ran out to the forest, and they stole the sweet rice. And then the group of people that came to get it couldn't find it anywhere. But then Kalaji said that there's so many wonderful preparations that were offered on the altar. We have to get it. Otherwise you just get a little bit. The devotees were getting distributed. So they were thinking, this is the most difficult robbery that we've ever tried to attempt. So Kulaji and Devaki Nandan and Param Brahma were thinking, how could we get trays of this prasad? So they decided, you have to go right in the pujari room, right through the hall where everyone's waiting for prasadam, this room out here, and somebody has to take the prasad right out of the pujari room after it gets off the altar and steal it. Who could do that? So Kulaji decided it has to be somebody who appears to be such a innocent, honest, Brahminical person that everyone trusts, but who's not actually like that. So they selected me. Kalaji Prabhu told me, you have to go in there and you have to get 2 trays. There were only 4 trays total. They were huge trays, gigantic trays that were stacked high. So you get 2 trays of the 4 for the 6 cowherd boys. and the rest of the community could have the other 2 trays. And I said, that's impossible. He said, no, it is. He said, along with the instruction comes the empowerment of the Lord. I said, but your wife is the head pujari, Kutila. Everyone's afraid of Kutila.
Yes.
I said, could you arrange with your wife that I'm allowed to do it? And he said, no way. I mean, it has to be done in such a way that she has no idea that I know anything about it. So I went in the pujari room, and there was Kutila and Vijaya, the 2 head pujaris. They were just taking the trays off the altar. The cowherd boys were in the barn, and everybody was in this prasadam hall. You had to go through the prasadam hall to get to the pujari room. And I was just kind of standing in the pujari room, and they were looking at me, and they said, what do you want? And I said, no, I just thought that you wanted me. He said, no, we don't want you. So I said, all right, well, in case you do want me, I'm here. I didn't know what to say. But I had to do it, I was ordered. So then they went into the altar to get the next batch, and I just grabbed 2 of these huge trays. Between the 2 of them, they probably weighed about 50, 60 pounds. They were stacked high. And I covered them up with my chadar. So I was thinking nobody would see what I was taking out. And I walked through the whole pujari room with these trays under my chadar. My chadar had all these holes in it, but somehow nobody saw. And I just looked like I was just carrying out the instruction of Mother Kutila. And I brought it into the barn, and the cowherd boys were dancing when they saw it. Kalaji Karu was smiling and embracing me. Taru, the prasadam addict, he was ecstatic.
He got 1 tray, we got all.
So what happened is we took those trays up to the silo, where the silage was stored, and we buried it under silage so people wouldn't see it. And then we had this 20 gallons of sweet rice, right? Something like that.
I think we got a 10-gallon bucket. They found 1, and we had 1 10
We had a 10-gallon bucket of sweet rice. So then it was time to serve out the prasad. And there were 2 trays missing and 10 gallons of sweet rice. So it was obvious who must have taken it. Somehow nobody, even though I walked by with all of it, nobody ever suspected that I did it. To this day, only the cowherd boys knew. So they were wondering who did it. They were thinking it must be Devaki, Nandan, Param Brahma, and Taru, because they were very famous for getting prasad by hook or crook. So all the devotees were sitting waiting for the Ras Purnima prasad. They were not waiting, they were waiting. They were desperate all year round. This was their chance. So the pujaris came out and said, it's gone. It's gone. So the head server was Roma Harshankar. And he was like a Kshatriya. Besides being a head of serving, he was also in charge of cutting down trees in the forest. So what he did is he took on the responsibility like the sheriff. And he got a posse. He brought about 20 devotees who were angry as fire. They were convinced that the cowherd boys stole the prasad. So they all came charging into the barn. and we saw them coming. And right in the barn there was this 10-gallon pot. And we wondered, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? They're coming. They had sticks. They were really angry. So what we did is we poured the sweet rice into the buckets that we milked the cows with and put them under the cows. And we were milking into those buckets. So they came in, they were like the FBI. They just searched every molecular particle of the barn to find prasad. And they couldn't find it anywhere. They were looking, and we were just milking. And they just never conceived of looking into the bucket. So this way it was a great success. And Kolhapur Prabhu was very pleased with me and he gave me his heartfelt blessing. I'll tell you another story about Saratpurma. Several years later, at that time I was doing the all-night kirtan just outside. Do you remember the rats of this building? This building was so old, it was infested with these gigantic rats. Every bit as big as the Bombay rats. Field rats. And they lived in the walls and in the ceiling. Do you remember when we would just hear like ka-boom, 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 ka-boom? That was because between there's like a board between the ceiling and these rafters. The rats would live up there, and they would run across, and you'd hear boom, 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 big, big rats. So they were very, very sharp teeth, very vicious. They would make holes, and they would be able to get out into the building anywhere they wanted. So what they would do is at night, we would put milk sweets for the deities, and they would make different holes, and they could make holes fast in the walls, because they were cheap walls. They would come in and drink the condensed milk, and then eat the milk sweets right at night when the deities were supposed to be eating it. So we actually had to stop leaving it out overnight. It used to be we'd leave it overnight, remember? So, and people were really scared of these rats. So on Ras Purnima, this was at the peak of the rats, they put about 100 preparations covering the entire altar. And they wanted to keep it on all night for the pleasure of the deities. So what about the rats? So Kirtanananda Maharaj came down and said, I want you to have your all-night kirtan on the altar tonight, all night, so that the rats don't come. So this little space right here, to the left of the deities, I mean, I felt I was so offensive, but I was ordered to do it. To actually stay on the altar all night with the deities of Radha, Vrindavan, Chandra, Gauri, Tai, and Jagannath. And they gave me a broom in case the rats attacked. So all night long, I was singing, and every time I'd hear the rats starting coming to the wall, I would just start beating, I would start singing loud and beating the broom and beating the broom and beating the broom. And all night, it was the most anxiety-ridden night of my life. Sarat Purnima, I was fighting off rats. Right in front of the deities. And the next morning, I was devastated. Because these rats were actually attacking me too. So I was just all night fighting rats, trying to protect the prasad. So I was just really, really devastated. I was living down here at the time. So that morning I just wanted to go to sleep. And Kirtanananda Swami told me, I want you to give Srimad Bhagavatam class. So I said, I can't give class. There's no way. I'll just talk about rats. I said, no, you give class. So I sat down and I couldn't even say Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya properly. And I gave like a really short class. And then he started attacking me to prove that Krishna was God. And you remember that? And then everybody in the community was attacking me with questions. So ultimately I surrendered.
I was busy taking them out.
I surrendered. Anyway.
I think we should talk about one of the most defining moments in New Vrindavan history now. We've heard some of the wonderful, humorous activities. Well, before I say that, one of the devotees asked me yesterday in Vrindavan what was one of the most exciting or inspiring things. So, what we were saying was this relationship we have amongst ourselves. If you find God brothers and God sisters that you go through these ordeals with, the bond that you develop is extraordinary, transcendental, and it lives with you. These devotees that lived in this community for that 10 to 15 year period and poured ice water over their heads, ate practically nothing, came and saw Radha and Chandra every day without fail, month after month, year after year. This kind of a relationship, core relationship you develop with the other devotees. This Srila Prabhupada's request that we build 7 temples on 7 hills. So we were going to start the first temple, actual from beginning. Of course, we converted the farmhouse and we put an extension on. But this was going to be the first temple we built on a hill, and it was going to be Govindaji Temple. And there's a hill right at the top up here. When we go to see where the Bhagavad Dharma discourses were held, we can point out the Govindaji Hill is one hill over. So we were going to plant the Ananta Sesha. We were going to have fire sacrifices, have a big festival weekend. We were going to plant the Ananta Sesha here. And it was also the plan to commemorate the start of building Prabhupada's palace. So we were going to also put Ananta Sesha under the foundation of the palace. So a lot of devotees came from all over, and were visiting. And there was a busload of book distributors who came. Dharmatma Prabhu was in charge of the book distribution program. They came from Canada, Vancouver. They came for the festival. They had been preaching in Kentucky the day before, and as you know, quite often young people, all ages, they sometimes become interested in finding out about Krishna consciousness, and within a matter of a day or two they'll move into a temple and move back out, or sometimes they'll stay. So it was not unusual for people to come and visit us on moment's notice, and people, of course, relatives were always very concerned. Well, they had gone through a community in Kentucky, this traveling party, and then they had come to New Vrindavan. Well, there was a group of people there who thought that one of their children had left the community and joined this traveling party of book distributors. So, the festival had occurred, and within a matter of a day or two, I was dressing Radha Vrindavan Chandra. We used to dress in pairs. We had Gauri tie you know that this is not the original altar. Actually, the marble that is on the altar of Jagannath up at the temple is the original. This step is the original, but wainscoting is original. But this is just put here temporarily. So we would dress, Gauri Thai would be, and then small Radha Krishna deities, Radha Vrindavan Chandra, then small Jagannath, and then of course in the windowsill was big Lord Jagannath over on that side. I was dressing Krishna, and Sudanu, I think, was next to me. He was dressing Radharani. And some people had come during the festival thinking that their children had come here. And we knew nothing about it. We had searched and we couldn't find it. Teenagers, not young children, but older teenagers. They were not here. People left disgruntled. Then one devotee named Shamakunda, there were so many deities here and there was so much going on. Our dressing was very elaborate. And so there were always devotees in the puja room dealing with jewelry, dealing with outfits for how many sets of deities we had here. So it was always very busy back here. And all of a sudden, we had just gone on and started. And I think that they were just finishing up Tulsi Puj, getting ready to give, and Srimad Bhagavatam class had just started. And Shamakunda came running on the altar to me and said, "The demons are back." And I looked at him. He said, "The men that were here looking for the kids, they come back with a whole carload of them and they all have guns." And we just looked at each other. And I looked to Radha Vrindavan Chandra trying to understand what was about to happen and what I should do as a result. Just after he came running in, the temple room ended where that banister is. And just like these windows, these old church windows, there was one across the back also. And all of a sudden, the devotees were paying obeisances for, I think, the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam class. You correct me. And all of a sudden, you heard a smash in windows. And a gun came pointed into this window here, and behind the Vyasas on that window there, and 2 shots rang out. And immediately, some devotees fell to the floor, and there was blood. 2 other men came in this door and held guns on all of the pujaris. Another 1 or maybe 2 men came in here and shot a bullet into the ceiling. And they huddled all the devotees into center, and were not convinced that we had told the truth and that we were harboring their children. That's how this episode started. Little friend.
We could all speak what we remember. There was one devotee here. I believe it was Kiranasa. They grabbed him by his seat and put a gun to his head. Then Dharmatma was here, and they put a gun to his head. And devotees started chanting in their Singha prayers, and they shut their guns again and said, "Shut up or we'll kill you all." Then they took Radhanatha Swami and Dharmatma and said, "We're going to bring you to the top of the hill to dig your graves, then we're going to kill you." So they literally brought them to the top of the hill with shovels. Meanwhile, one devotee named Bidan Chandra was laying right in the, just where you're sitting, near the center of the temple room, just laying there, bleeding profusely. We thought he was dead. He was motionless. And Varsana Maharaj, he was a brahmachari then. When the gun came through the window, he actually tried to grab the gun and he was shot and it hit him in the face. And Krishna Kata, another devotee, he was shot, I think, in the arm and he was bleeding. In the shoulder, he was bleeding profusely. So all these devotees are laying there bleeding. So everybody else took these people quite seriously. And they pointed their guns at us and said, we're going to kill all of you today and enjoy it. Then they put a gun to one devotee's head and told him to tear down the curtains in front of the altar. And that devotee tore down the curtains. Then they, if I remember right, they put a gun to another devotee's head and told him to push Radha Vrindavan Chandra off the altar.
Two of them escorted Kirtananda and Dharmama out the door and up the steps. And in the meantime, there were four others here, just in the mood of torturing the devotees. When he tore down the curtain, made all the pujaris come off the altar and sit here. Then one of the men with his gun started poking things on the altar, carved altar, and he hit one of the lights and it started sparking. And then he asked, there was a guest here, and there was another devotee named Vipina. And he put them to the gun. He said, what are these things? What are these statues? He said, come up here and take one of the statues. We didn't know what he was going to do. So at gunpoint, he had Vipina and this other guest take Vrindavan Chandra and bring him out to the floor. And then he had them drop Vrindavan Chandra here. He then pointed to Radharani and said, now go get that one. And I stood up because I was sitting right there. And like he had done to others, he put the gun right to my forehead and said, sit down or I'll kill you. So this other devotee then, actually he had Krishna and Radharani, then he had them drop them together and made a very loud cracking sound. And then the devotees were in the devotees were crying, complete tears, and frozen as to wanting to do something, but not sure or not convinced that should we give up our life at this point. There was no question of defending ourselves. We had nothing. It was certainly, if anyone would have objected, they would have been killed on the spot. So the question in our minds, shall we give up our life for the deities at this point? And when we were in that state of mind, the two that had gone up the hill came running in, and in a hurry they sounded afraid, and they said what was going on, and they yelled in, let's get out of here. And
Kolhapur stood up and had a gun on his head. Another devotee stood up to stop them. And one of the very senior Vaishnavas here, he yelled out, he said, Krishna has left the deity form. There's nothing they can do. Sit down. He said that because he knew that if anyone stood up, they would be killed. And everything was happening so fast. Devotees really didn't know what to believe or what not to believe. But we saw before our own eyes our worshipable lordships being thrown to the floor and breaking into pieces. The sound of that was so loud when Srimati Radharani fell to the floor and made such a loud sound, unearthly sound. that the people on the hill heard it. And they came running down and told the others, let's get out of here. Before they left, one of them, I believe the leader, he stood right where the deities were at once, under the canopy, and said, now you worship me, I'm your God. And then said, we're coming back to kill all of you. Then they left.
Of course, the local authorities were called, and they didn't arrive for at least an hour. Although there were literally dozens, if not 100 witnesses. Later on, when they found the suspects and they were identified, they were never charged with anything. Prabhupada later made a comment to us, what could you do? He said, now you must arm yourself to defend the deities. If you had no guns, what could you do? He said, but now you must be able to defend yourself. The effect it had on us, both devastating, inspiring. We had to challenge ourselves for our realization. We had to try to understand what had happened and how the deities wanted us to serve them. It also separated us from the local community. We felt abandoned. Well, of course, we had been sued and people had driven through the community at times, shooting out guns. We never took it as seriously. And then when this happened, when the local community basically turned their back on us and basically said, you're on your own, had a very... the effect was isolating us even further, and in that sense becoming more dependent and more dedicated to serving Radha Vrindavan Chandra.
Many devotees left at that time. But those men gave their word that they were going to come back to kill us all. In order to stay here, that was in 1973, the month of June. It's a very simple community, extremely austere. In order to remain here, you had to accept that I must be willing to die for the deities. The devotees felt so ashamed that they witnessed what they did, that practically every single devotee that stayed, they were making lifelong vows of dedication, of complete surrender. It created such an intense spirit of unity. Devotees really, from their heart and soul, felt that they had to give their lives to Radha Vrindavan Chandra in order to atone for what they had seen. And from my observation, it was from that point that Vrindavan really began to expand and grow. Because at that point, there was a core of devotees who were willing to surrender their lives wholesale for this project. It's wonderful, because it appears ultimately that Radha Vrindavan Chandra knew that this is what it would take for us to really surrender ourselves to follow Prabhupada's instructions to build this community. Srila Prabhupada wrote to us and said that if it's possible, you should repair the deities and put them back on the altar and worship them from that time on. So the deities were in many pieces. They were brought up to, where were they brought? And Bhagavatananda Prabhu, who was a very great artist, he spent many days, day and night, just trying to repair the deities. One of the most, during that time, there was just a small set of brass Radha Krishna deities, just about 4 inches tall that were on the altar. There was a festival. After the deities were repaired, they returned to the altar. That was simultaneously the most solemn, grave, and joyful and ecstatic festival I've ever seen. The rasas in people's hearts for that moment, when the curtains were opening, to see Radha Vrindavan Chandra back on the altar as our worshipable deities. It was ecstatic because they're back, but at the same time, what they went through and what we had to see was so strong in everyone's heart. I remember for that arti, the first arti of the return of Radha Vrindavan Chandra, the devotees were chanting so loud from the very core of their hearts. They were literally crying out in devotion. So that experience was one of the most glorious moments, actually, for the development of Vrindavan. Because any project in Krishna consciousness can only develop according to the commitment and dedication of the devotees.
So when we began, I referred to this mood that we all embrace, that we are part of Radha Vrindavan Chandra's New Vrindavan pastimes. And these tests, these extraordinary situations, when you come to serve Radha Vrindavan Chandra, you can expect this to happen. In your personal life, you can expect these traumas, these catastrophes. And how you react, of course, is how you approach Krishna.
I think just a couple of things I remember about it. I wasn't here, I came a couple months later, but didn't Kirtananda Swami, when they came in, didn't he offer himself as, when they took him up the hill, didn't he offer himself as the leader or something?
Yeah, they asked for the leader.
Yeah, and he was very, I remember hearing stories that he was very brave when that had happened. Stood up and kind of gave himself, and I remember Dharmatma telling me that when they went up the hill, he was very brave and composed, and then I think I also remember after it happened, you were talking about devotees taking long vows, and I think he also fasted and was very severe on himself for months after that. I thought I had heard.
They all came before the deities when they took vows. Every one of us. And that was one of our atonements, that we all individually went before the deities and made personal vows that he said should be lifelong vows.
One of the things I can remember from that whole incident was we began what is called 24-hour deity watch, where devotees would take shifts and sit within the temple although Vrindavan Chandra wasn't on the altar, still we had a fear that they would return. So we began this program of 24-hour duty watch. Devotees would stay, I think it was 3 or 4 hour shifts, would go to around the clock. And that went on for months and months and months. And even Radhanatha Swami, he actually participated in this. And as Advaita was saying, he was very, very hard on himself. In fact, he was so broken-hearted when he saw what had happened that he was practically crying constantly. His heart was very broken. He took some he fasted, and he also participated in duty watch. Then right after that, in order to ensure that devotees would be ready for anything else that may have come from these gang members, one devotee came on the request of, I can't exactly remember, maybe the other devotees can remember how he came, but he was a green beret. His name was Uddaraya, and he was trained in all the arts of military activity. And I remember for like weeks and months after a while, part of our program was to go out and do army calisthenics, and we would do left face, right face, and all this. We would be trained like, it was like boot camp. And that went on for some time. It was serious. The devotees wanted to do whatever they could do in order to prevent anything else to happen. And we also felt a sense of atonement, that whatever we could do to make up for what had happened, we were willing to take on some austerity. But as Kaladi Prabhu mentioned in Radha, there was such a bonding within the community after that happened that it really brought the community together in a very, very serious and wonderful way.
The idea of, I touched on it earlier about the night guards, and Chandramal Maharaj just mentioned it again. After this attack, the community, there are a few very deep there's a lot of social impact that affected us for years later, and still actually affects us even today, and I'll mention that later, but the idea that the community we would then guard ourselves against such attacks. I told you the story about Madhava Ghosh and I guarding the community. You heard that one. Chandramal Maharaj mentioned Uddaraya coming and starting a new Vrindavan militia. And we bought a few more guns. We probably had about 10 rifles all totaled. Meanwhile, somehow or other, news of this leaked out to the public, and there was articles coming out all over the country. Meanwhile, we'd been shot, and devotees were shot, bleeding on the floor. The people who did it weren't prosecuted, but like 6 months later, there were articles coming out all over the entire country about how New Vrindavan was stockpiling an arsenal. Meanwhile, if you knew the truth, we had like 10 rifles that nobody knew how to use. As a matter of fact, what happened was this devotee Uddaraya came, and he was training us, as Chandramali talked about, up on the hillside. We would have exercises and marching and learning all these arts. I think Uddaraya got sick of us after about 2 or 3 months, and he left, because we were pretty useless. But the thing that stands out in my mind is near the end of our armed guard activity. What happened was construction was going on up at Srila Prabhupada's palace. And one night they had, there were about 10 of us up at the palace to do an exercise and training with our rifles. And, we're about 20, 21 years old, the majority of us. And we're up there near the palace, and there's a circle of about 10 or 11 men, no bigger than 10 feet around. And we all have our rifles, and the one devotee, says something, we gather in, we're in this small circle, and one of the devotees, like I said, it's a 10-foot circle, and the devotees all holding rifles, and one of the devotees goes, and puts his rifle down, and it goes off. So we all scramble on the floor, all the devotees are ducking. And then when we told Kirtananda Maharaj about that, he said, okay, that's it, you guys forget it. We're getting rid of the rifles. And we ended the armed night guard at that time, and our night guard, we replaced it, Kirtananda Maharaj replaced it. What he did was, Radhanath Maharaj lived up at Vrindavan and was the pujari up there. And Kirtananda Maharaj decided that instead of having armed guards at night, what we would do is we would have Radhanath Maharaj be the night guard. So we got rid of all the rifles before any devotees killed themselves. And we had Radhanath Maharaj, Kirtananda Maharaj instructed Radhanath Maharaj to come down from Vrindavan every evening. So he would come down from Vrindavan every evening at about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, and then proceed to sit in the patio right outside below Kirtananda Maharaj's cabin, where he would chant bhajans all night long until the devotees got up for Mangalarti. He would sit out there and do bhajans, and that was the protection of the community. Kirtananda Maharaj would leave his door open so he could hear Radhanath Maharaj chanting, and that's how the community would take rest at night, with Radhanath Maharaj, the warrior, as our night guard, chanting bhajan in the court. And how long did that go on, Maharaj? That you were chanting at night? All night long. After serving during the day, he was also the pujari at Vrindavan during the day. 2 years. He'd chant every night in the courtyard. So that was our night guard system. There's probably hundreds of more stories, but.
Yeah, we were utter failures at the militia idea. I remember one night, Sudana was guarding in front of the temple here, and some rowdy, drunken young guys pulled up. Sudana had the rifle across his chest. They just came walking up to him and they said, "Can I see that?" He gave them the rifle. They looked at it. They gave it back to him and they drove away.
During those days, the most favorite tavern where they would serve alcohol was just up the road, between here and Prabhupada's palace. It was called the Skyview Inn. And people, especially on weekends, they would just get drunk all night long. And then in the middle of the night, they'd have to drive by here. And they all had guns, rifles. They would shoot at us. I would just be sitting there in the patio. Actually, it was from 9:30 until 2:30 in the morning every day. I had to sing. And I'd be sitting there, and they would be yelling and screaming as they drive by and shooting. It was awful. Almost every weekend people would shoot. The closest they ever got to hit me was I was under a light bulb because I was singing songs from the Vaishnava songbook, and they shot out the light bulb over me. And all the glass got in my seat. But my biggest fear during the all-night kirtan was that I'd fall asleep. Because if I'd fall asleep, all the devotees would hear that I was sleeping and they would start chastising me. If anybody woke up in the middle of the night and they didn't hear singing, they would say, "Radhanath, you're sleeping!"